Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at some sound devices and rhythm in poetry. It's really fascinating all the different techniques that writers can use to kind of add layers of meaning and make
Hmm.
their words really sing.
Yeah. It's like they're composing music with words, right?
Exactly. And the more we learn about these techniques, the more we can unlock the magic of poetry and maybe even become better communicators ourselves in the process. So, to kick things off, what exactly are sound devices?
So sound devices are like specific tools, literary tools that poets and writers in general can use to emphasize certain sounds and create musical effects in their work. It's not just about making things sound pretty, although that's certainly part of it. But sound devices can actually be used to create really vivid imagery or evoke strong emotions or even highlight important themes.
So it's like adding like a secret layer of meaning beneath the surface of the words?
Precisely. And, this manipulation of sound has been around for centuries. Think back to the early days of literature, when stories and poems were shared primarily through oral tradition. Sound devices played a really crucial role in captivating audiences and making those tales more memorable.
That makes a lot of sense. In a world without written words, sound would have been everything. So let's talk about some specific types. Let's start with assonance. I always get that one mixed up with consonants.
It's easy to do. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within a line of text. Think of a phrase like, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain." Notice how that A sound is repeated, creating a kind of internal rhyme. And it really draws attention to those words.
Ah, okay. I see. And consonants. That's the one that focuses on consonants, right? I feel like it creates a smoother, more subtle effect.
That's a great observation. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds within a line. And yeah, you're right. It often creates a much more subtle sonic effect. So think of a phrase like, "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers." There's a lot going on there with that repeated key sound, but it's not as blatant as a full rhyme.
Right. So it's more about the feeling of the words than a perfect sonic match. I'm starting to understand the distinction. And speaking of sonic matches, we can't forget about alliteration. It feels like that one pops up everywhere.
Alliteration is probably one of the most well-known and most frequently used sound devices. It's the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Think of a phrase like, "Sally sells seashells by the seashore." It's very catchy and playful, right? It rolls right off the tongue, which is why it's so effective in things like advertising jingles and tongue twisters.
And now I'm starting to see how these devices aren't just for poems, they're really woven into the fabric of our everyday language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another one that bridges that gap between poetry and everyday life is onomatopoeia.
Ugh, yes. Onomatopoeia, the sound effects of the literary world.
Exactly. Onomatopoeia refers to words that imitate natural sounds, like buzz, hiss, crackle, boom. Think about how much more vivid and engaging a sentence becomes when you can actually hear the sound being described.
It's like the writer is bringing the sound directly to your ears.
Exactly. And that's the power of onomatopoeia. It adds a sensory dimension to the writing and makes the experience much more immersive for the reader. And speaking of sensory experiences, I think it's time we delve into two contrasting sound devices, cacophony and euphony.
Ooh, okay. Those sound a bit more intense. What's the difference between the two?
So cacophony refers to a combination of harsh, jarring sounds. It's often created using hard consonants, like B, D, G, K, P, T, me consonant blends. Think about a phrase like, "The clanging of the cymbals pierced the silence." There's like a jarring, almost unpleasant quality to the sound, which is exactly what the writer's going for.
That's interesting. It's like the sound is reflecting the meaning of the words, and euphony is the opposite of that, right?
Precisely. Euphony is all about creating pleasant and harmonious sounds, and often it uses softer consonants and vowels. Think of a line like, "The gentle breeze whispered secrets through the trees." It's smooth and flowing, almost melodic, and it creates a sense of peace and tranquility.
I can practically hear the breeze rustling through the leaves, so it's fascinating to me how poets can use these contrasting devices to really evoke such different moods and emotions.
And that's exactly why they're so powerful. It's
Mm.
not just about adding random sounds to a poem. It's about making deliberate choices to shape the reader's experience and reinforce the poem's themes.
I'm already starting to see poetry in a whole new light, and I'm curious, beyond just evoking emotions, are there other reasons why poets would use sound devices? Why go through all this trouble to create these sonic effects?
That's a great question. Remember we talked about how sound was so essential in those early days of oral storytelling? Well, even though most of us read silently now, Those sound devices still have a powerful effect on how we experience the text. They create vivid sound images in our minds, even if it's on a subconscious level, which really enriches the experience of language.
So it's like adding a soundtrack to the words.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And, we see these sound devices all the time beyond poetry, right? They're used in advertising, music lyrics, even political speeches. They're everywhere.
It's like a secret language we're all speaking without even realizing it. Okay, this has been fantastic. Let's shift gears and talk about rhythm. What exactly do we mean by rhythm in poetry?
It's got to be more than just the beat, right?
Yeah, it's a little more nuanced than that. Rhythm in poetry involves the patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables in lines of poetry, creating a sort of sonic wave that carries the reader along.
Okay. So it's not just about individual syllables, but about the overall flow and pacing of the words. Exactly. And this is where the concept of meter comes in. Meter refers to the specific pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables within a line of poetry. It's that underlying structure that gives the poem its rhythmic character, almost like a framework upon which a composer builds a melody.
Okay, so if rhythm is like the overall vibe of the poem, meter is the specific blueprint for that vibe.
You got it. Think of meter as the musical time signature, like 44 or 34, while rhythm is how those beats are actually played out. And just like in music, different meters create different effects.
I'm starting to hear it now. So poets are kind of like composers, using these different rhythmic patterns to evoke different moods and emotions. I never really realized how much intentionality went into crafting the sound of a poem. It's like a whole other level of artistry.
It really is. And there are specific terms for these different metrical patterns, like iamb, trochee, spondee, dactyl, and anapest. But before we get bogged down in the technical terms, let's explore some examples of how these rhythms are used in famous poems.
I'm all ears. Bring on the examples.
One of the most famous examples of a specific meter is iambic pentameter. Shakespeare used this extensively in his plays and poems, and it creates a kind of dead-dum rhythm, like a heartbeat. Think of the opening line of Sonnet 18, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" That's iambic pentameter in action.
I can hear it. And Shakespeare wasn't the only one playing with rhythm. I remember reading somewhere that Milton's Paradise Lost uses a lot of spondees, right? Those always felt weighty and dramatic to me.
You're exactly right. A spondee is a metrical foot consisting of two stressed syllables placed together, and Milton uses them to add emphasis and gravity to certain lines in Paradise Lost, giving the poem this more solemn and epic tone.
It's like he's slowing down the rhythm to really highlight certain words or phrases, making them feel more important. And what about trochees? Didn't we learn about those in Macbeth? They always had this sort of driving, almost chant-like quality.
Yes, the witches' scenes in Macbeth often utilize trochaic meter, which is a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, creating that driving, cant-like rhythm, which really adds to the eerie and supernatural atmosphere of those scenes.
It's amazing how these subtle choices in rhythm can have such a huge impact on the reader's experience.
It truly is a testament to the power of language and the skill of the poet.
So we've talked about what rhythm is, the different types of meter, and even seen some examples from literature. But let's bring it back to the so what factor. Why should we as readers, or even just as people going about our day, care about rhythm in poetry? What does it add to the experience?
That's the million-dollar question. A skilled poet's use of rhythm can evoke specific emotions, create a sense of momentum, highlight key ideas, and enhance the overall musicality of the poem, making it much more memorable and impactful.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by how rhythm operates almost invisibly, shaping our emotional response without us even realizing it. It's like the heartbeat of the poem, driving the emotion and meaning. And it makes me wonder, beyond these classic examples, how are contemporary poets playing with rhythm and sound? What new and exciting things are they doing with these age-old techniques?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore further as we continue our deep dive. Welcome back. We were just about to get into how contemporary poets are kind of pushing the boundaries of sound and rhythm.
Yeah, it's like they're taking these ancient tools and reinventing them for a modern audience.
Exactly. So one trend we're seeing is a move away from those more traditional forms and meters.
Yeah.
Free verse poetry, which doesn't adhere to strict rhyme schemes or those metrical patterns, that's become increasingly popular. But even within free verse, poets are still very conscious of sound and rhythm, and they use things like line breaks and pauses and repetition to create these really unique sonic effects.
So even without those formal structures, sound and rhythm are still playing a really key role.
Absolutely. It's just a different approach. Yeah. Instead of relying on those predetermined patterns, They're creating their own rhythms based on the natural cadence of language and how their ideas flow. Think of it like jazz improvisation.
Okay.
There's still a structure there, but there's also a lot of room for experimentation and personal expression.
I love that analogy. So it's like they're riffing on the traditional elements of poetry, creating something new and exciting in the process. It's making me think of these poems as sonic landscapes, full of unexpected twists and turns. So, what are some examples of poets who are doing this really well?
Well, one poet who comes to mind is Ocean Vuong. His work is incredibly lyrical and emotionally charged, and he uses a lot of sound devices like assonance and consonants to create a sense of longing and melancholy. He also plays a lot with line breaks and enjambment, which is when a sentence or phrase runs over from one line to the next, and it creates this sense of urgency and breathlessness.
I'm not familiar with his work, but you're making me want to check it out. So, that sense of urgency and breathlessness, it's like the form itself is mirroring the emotion of the poem.
Exactly, that's what makes it so powerful. Another poet who's doing some really innovative things with sound is A.E. Stallings.
Okay.
She's known for using those traditional forms like sonnets and villanelles, but she often subverts those forms in really surprising ways. She might use unexpected rhyme schemes or introduce jarring disruptions in the meter to create a sense of tension or unease.
It's like she's playing with our expectations, keeping us on the edge of our seats. I love that idea of subverting tradition, taking something familiar and making it new again.
That's what's so exciting about contemporary poetry. Poets are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible with language, and they're using sound and rhythm in ways that we've never seen before.
Something I've been thinking about is how this all connects back to music.
Uh-huh.
We've been talking about rhythm and meter as if they're musical concepts.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, are there actual parallels between the rhythms we've been talking about and musical rhythms?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the terms we use to describe those metrical patterns in poetry, like iamb and trochee, those are borrowed from musical terminology. An iamb, with its stressed pattern, that's the same as a musical upbeat, while a trochee, with its unstressed pattern, is like a musical downbeat.
Wow, really? So a poem written in an iambic pentameter is literally following a musical rhythm.
Exactly. Iambic pentameter creates a rhythm that's similar to a heartbeat or a march.
Okay.
It's very steady and predictable, which is one of the reasons why Shakespeare used it so effectively in his plays. It creates a sense of natural speech, while also elevating the language and giving it a sense of grandeur.
So poets are essentially composing music with their words.
In many ways, yes. They're thinking about the sounds of the words, the way they flow together, the pauses, the emphasis. All of these elements contribute to the overall sonic experience of the poem.
That's really making me realize how much I've been taking for granted when I read poetry. I've always been drawn to poems that sound good, but I never really stopped to think about why they sound good, or the intentionality behind those choices.
It's like listening to a piece of music without paying attention to the melody or the harmony. You might enjoy it on a surface level, but you're missing out on this whole layer of depth and complexity.
Okay, so now that I'm more attuned to these elements, what are some tips or tricks that you can share for how to listen for them when I'm reading poetry?
Well, one of the best things you can do is read aloud. Hearing the words spoken aloud will really help you to notice the rhythms, the rhymes, the alliteration, all of those sonic elements that might be less obvious on the page.
That's great advice. It's like giving the poem a voice. What else should I be listening for?
Pay attention to the poet's use of pauses and line breaks. Where do they choose to break the lines? How do those choices affect the rhythm and the flow of the poem?
Okay. So it's not just about the words themselves, but also the spaces between the words.
Exactly. That white space on the page is just as important as the words. It's all part of the overall composition of the poem.
It's almost like reading poetry is like deciphering a code, or maybe more like appreciating a piece of art. There's so much happening beneath the surface.
And the more you understand that code, the more you can appreciate the artistry.
I'm definitely feeling more equipped to do that now. This has been so eye-opening, or should I say ear-opening?
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
But hold on, we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover in this deep dive.
We've really been uncovering all these fascinating layers beneath the surface of poetry. But how does all this knowledge about sound devices and rhythm apply to our lives beyond the world of poems?
That's a question I think about all the time. It's like we've been given this decoder ring for language, and suddenly we can see these sonic elements shaping communication all around us.
Exactly. It's not just about, analyzing poetry. It's about understanding how these tools can make us better communicators in all aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. Whether you're writing an email or crafting a presentation or even just having a conversation, Being mindful of sound and rhythm can make your words more impactful and more memorable.
So even if we're not aspiring poets, we can still benefit from this knowledge.
Definitely. Think about alliteration, for example. It's not just a poetic device. We see it used all the time in advertising slogans and brand names because it just makes things catchy, easy to remember.
Like in Nike, just do it. It's simple and powerful and uses alliteration to drive that message home.
Exactly. Or think about how consonants can create a sense of smoothness and flow in our writing, make our sentences more pleasant to read and easier to understand.
So even if we're not consciously thinking about iams and trochees, we can still benefit from understanding those basic principles of sound and rhythm.
Absolutely. It's like having a secret weapon in your communication arsenal. Even a little bit of awareness can make a huge difference.
It's like we've been given a toolkit to enhance our communication skills. That's so empowering.
And the best part is that it's not just about writing. Understanding sound and rhythm can also make us better speakers. Think about how a speaker uses pauses and emphasis to create rhythm in their speech.
Right. I've definitely been to presentations where the speaker just drones on in a monotone and it's like so hard to stay engaged.
Exactly. But when a speaker varies their pace, uses pauses strategically, and emphasizes key words, it creates this natural rhythm that keeps the audience hooked. It's like they're composing a piece of music with their words, building tension and release, creating moments of impact.
This is making me rethink my entire approach to public speaking. I never really realized how much these subtle elements could impact an audience's experience.
And just like with poetry, the rhythm of a speech can convey emotion, build suspense, and even inspire action.
This is blowing my mind. It feels like we've unlocked this hidden code of communication. Okay, I have one final question. What about in our everyday lives? Outside of writing and speaking, can this knowledge actually change the way we experience the world around us?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. Once you become attuned to those nuances of sound and rhythm, you start to notice them everywhere. In the rustling of leaves, the crashing of waves, the rhythm of a heartbeat, even in the cadence of everyday conversations.
It's like we've been given this heightened awareness of our sonic landscape.
Exactly. And it can be a truly transformative experience. It can make us more present, more mindful, more appreciative of the world around us. It's like we've been given a new set of senses, or at least a heightened awareness of the ones we already have.
I love that. It feels like we've just scratched the surface of something vast and profound. This has been such an inspiring and insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about poetry, but about language and communication in general.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep listening, keep reading, keep exploring, and keep those ears and minds open to the music of the world.
That's beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of sound devices and rhythm. Until next time, keep those minds curious and remember, knowledge is power.